I think it would be good that we do talk about maybe specifically religion versus spirituality,
Yeah, I like
freedom
that.
versus control. I don't know what that
Right.
title may look like for a video, but just kind of get into a bit talking about spirituality and how it was meant to be practiced through Christianity and what today people mean when they say just spirituality and this vague term that they don't want to connect to Christianity because of the stigma around the organized religion. And
Hmm.
before we continue scrutinizing more.
Right, right. I think that people who aren't interested in it at all is because of that, because they see um, what religion has caused throughout the years,
Do
and
you
so
mean people who aren't interested in spirituality or religion?
I would say more religion, like the writings and stuff like that. Like people won't even pick up a Bible because of what it may represent to them. But then there's the opposite side of the spectrum for me. The opposite side of the spectrum for me is that someone's picking up this book and they're just like blindly stepping into something uh, without understanding that it is a very spiritual book. So they're taking it a little bit too literally, maybe sometimes, or just not recognizing that there's been a lot of influence over this book over a lot, hundreds, even thousands of years when you're taking the Old Testament. I mean, this book has been changed and edited and rewritten and added and taken away, and like all these things that we as Christians, I think in America, don't think that happened. We think it's like some sacred text, nobody's messed with it, it's exactly what it was, from its oral traditions 10,000 years ago till today. And I think that's a bit naive and foolish to think something like that. I think there's clear evidence that we can see that it has been edited. We'll just use that word, edited. It
Not
has
just
been edited.
edited, not just edited, also written by various people's, like even Matthew, the gospel is written like 90 AD, and it is heavily just navigating to connect Jesus to, Jewish Messiah. And even within the Bible, the script is altered or the narratives have been written based on what they're following, what they want people to follow. So, and I think that's exactly why people can view it as less spiritual, because just understanding and knowing the history makes it less spiritual. But I do think that's why if I just zoom out and just look at Jesus' teachings based on the evidence we have, granted, a lot of this evidence is also in these books. But if I step out and look at the historians and the governors of the time that wrote about Jesus, even as a troublemaker, even as a phenomena that they're like, why are these people congregating and singing hymns? There's to them, there's just like, what the heck is going on? So even the surprise aspect, or people close to Jesus that wrote about just the teachings, not even about Jesus, kind of like James. And then if you look at the accounts like Luke or Mark, who are more neutral, they're not taking a side, and their earlier writings, way earlier than the let's say John or Matthew that came later, all of that, if I just zoom out and look at it, I just kind of can extract the teaching, which seems to be aligned across the board as to, minus the elements that have been inserted to connect some dots that maybe weren't there for Jesus. The teaching itself is highly spiritual. It is literally trying to drive people to spirituality, to that internal freedom.
Hmm.
And yet, how ironic that something like that gets taken and brought right back to control, full control of like, follow this or else.
Hmm. But yeah, you can see that happening throughout the timeline, and it's happened more than once. It's so interesting. 'Cause, I mean, what I was, I mean, I do a lot of research like all the time, like every day. I'm always like researching something a little bit new and just trying to find. And I try to use the most like authoritative sources that I can to capture information. Um, but uh, I think there's I think the if you do that, you do get a dynamic of kind of uh the dialogue between two different groups who say like, okay, well, like we think Jesus is divine, we think Jesus is only human, or Jesus is human and divine. Like all these
Two natured,
conversations
one
happen.
natured, yeah.
Right, but you gotta have if you just stick to one, I think you're gonna get confused quite easily rather than trying to see the whole picture because then you get what was it before we had this conversation? What was it before we had this debate? You know, what did we feel? What did we agree on? And you see that coming from each individual side. So you kind of have to take a step back sometimes. It's fascinating, but the one thing like that I've been looking into a lot is that I've been finding out throughout history all of these dates that perfectly align with each other regarding whatever god they're worshiping. And there is a god that has been worshipped since way back that follows the same celebratory dates that we do in Christianity, which is like Easter
Mm.
and
Okay.
Christmas, right? These are the two main holidays for Christians, but that those two dates have been historically recognized throughout many eras and cultures and all this stuff. And so what you see is that like all the way up until it comes into the Roman Empire, right? And then that's when those dates get accepted. So it wasn't like early Christians, you know, following Jesus, writing about Jesus, were like, okay, we're going to celebrate Christmas on December 25th, right? That wasn't a thing. You know, they didn't, you know, I guess they would do Passover because Passover was a Jewish tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So there was Passover, but yeah, that's different. You know, Christianity took a
I
big
mean, a
turn,
lot of
and
the Christianity rules came way after,
for sure,
including Christmas. And then I don't remember. Every time I researched the story of Christmas and how the tree and the Santa got into it, I learn it and then I'm like so uninterested that I just kind of forget again because it just seems whatever. It just doesn't seem irrelevant.
yeah,
Because in
right,
most cultures, I don't know if you know this, like back home, or even I just learned that even in Europe, the Christmas tree and the Santa and the gifts and all that festivities have nothing to do with Christmas. It has everything to do with the year turning, kind of like,
hmm
oh, here's, hey, new year, you know? And it has nothing to do with Christianity as far as the faith goes, but somehow in US specifically, the two merged into
right. Where it's like
one.
Jesus is born on December 25th, and he died on, and
Way where everywhere else it's January
during
6th. He was born January 6th everywhere else in the world.
oh, I see. I didn't even really know that. I guess
Yeah.
because I'm American, but uh, yeah, it's interesting because it definitely specifically aligns with winter solstice and um, you know the birthing of the sun and like sun worship. Sun worship comes from way back,
Hmm.
but you know you can see that now mixed into Christianity, and I think that just people being aware of that, like people being aware that like oh we're using the same uh, worshiping practices or days as past maybe considered pagan deities, right? Specifically, the Roman Empire would be Mithras. So Mithras was the I guess the deity that was being worshipped, sun worshipped
Hmm.
during the time of the Roman Empire when Christianity then migrated into this myth. And Mithras is actually an older tradition from like Persian Empire from a really long. So the first Mithras was actually the Persian Empire, and then later on became Roman. I don't know, some thousands of years later or something, but um,
Yeah.
which is the second worshiping of Mithras, which is all around that. And then you know, same thing. Easter is all about fertility and it's all regarding around agriculture and all these things. And like that's what you would assume historically. Like I'm a people, and my all of my life revolves around food and agriculture. Like everything really does revolve around that.
Of course.
So the seasons matter so much. The
And
sun
and
cycle matters so
nature.
much. Right. It
And
matters
nature.
so much.
Um it's interesting. There was something you mentioned, I believe, about the one nature, two nature, and this and that. And I think that's the problem. People get caught on insignificant details that honestly does not matter to me. Does not matter if Jesus was divine supernatural or just a human with incredibly valuable teachings. Because ultimately, his teaching is highly spiritual. It is to help you find peace, freedom, sanity, just be able to hold your ground, be a strong individual, principled, strong individual who also is very aware, very conscious, in tune with nature, and so on and so forth. Today, the type of people that probably come close to Jesus' teachings are more either Buddhists or the those highly spiritual people that just don't want to relate to any religion, but they just call themselves spiritual. If you see how historians have written about James, Jesus's brother, he was like a fanatical kind of teacher and following Jesus' teachings and teaching, but he was a bit overboard. Like there's actually accounts by I can't remember, a governor or a historian of some sort, Roman historians, that wrote like he was a odd person that just didn't bathe, and so he was just this spiritual being that somehow not bathing comes into play. And it's fascinating because now those there's a type of spiritual people that don't claim Christianity at all, but they are a lot more in tune with Jesus' teachings than Christians.
So basically, you're calling him a hippie. Is that what you're trying to say?
Actually, yes, I forgot that word. Yes,
Yeah,
Jesus was a hippie, but James was a far more radical hippie. Sounds like.
right. But so similar to John the Baptist. John the Baptist was also like coming out of the forest, eating wild honey is the one that gets me. I'm like, eating wild honey. Hmm.
I mean, yeah, you can, because bees, they do their
Hmm.
thing even without us meddling into it, and
But imagine
also
they're pollinating on something like a cannabis plant, and that's what they pollinate, and they
could be
create
anything. Yeah.
psychedelic honey, and this
Oh,
guy's
it
living on some like
could.
psychedelic honey. There's
Oh, that's
actually
a good
something
point.
called the psychedelic gospels, I think, which actually goes into this whole thing about like, oh, they think a lot of that was produced by like psychedelic experience. Some people believe that about Moses and the burning bush, right? The burning bush may have been like some sort of acacia bush that actually was releasing some sort of aroma of toxin or whatever that caused him to go into some spiritual trance or psychedelic trance, and
I
you
mean,
know
that is so much more likely than anything else, because here's the thing: nature is obviously wonderful. Like mushrooms and flowers and so many things that have these properties that we may or may not know, right? We find out, and then we know about mushrooms, so we find out and then we make it an experience. Like people who do mushrooms, let's say they make it a particular experience, or ayahuasca or whatever. Is ayahuasca a plant? Is it a plant?
it's actually a
I
mixture
actually
of
don't know.
plants.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you
Um,
need like but there's one that has
you
a
need to know
psychedelic
the right
compound, and
concoction.
then you actually have to have another one that allows you to receive it. So
Oh, okay.
so there's
Okay.
but for people to have just come up with this, like how did this come about? There are actually natural here in North Carolina. There are natural ayahuasca blends that grow like in
Interesting.
nature here. Um, well, one of them I don't know
Already
if is
blended
sort of
into the mixture.
no. They're two
I'm
different things.
kidding.
It's like the what's it called? Like the passion flower, I think is or the it's a North Carolina flower that actually contains some sort of MAOI, and then yeah.
Oh
Anyway,
my
it's
god.
it's
I have to know what that flower looks like, because here's the kicker. Why did I just jump in and say, "Oh, that is so much more likely?" So when I was a kid, there was this flowering plant on our yard that would bloom at night and come down during the day. So it was only blooming at night. And every single night, my friend and I would grab one of these flowers, and then we would just smell it, and we would just keep walking up and down the entire neighborhood, and we would just slowly start getting giddier and giddier, and then all of a sudden we're just completely just laughing for no reason at all. We're just out of our minds. Never once thought there's anything wrong with this flower or connected any patterns. Also, in Armenia back then, I don't even know the word drug. I don't know what any of this means. we knew about weed and we looked at weed the same category as heroin. You know what I mean? So it was just very like Soviet Union crazy, like, yeah. And so now here I am like doing this flower thing every evening because we weren't even understanding why are we so drawn to do that. So then one day, her and I just stumble into our house while laughing and like we're already high on our minds. And then there was a doctor having dinner with my dad, and this doctor just turned around, looked at that plant, and he said, "What, what is it? Where'd you get that?" And then he just basically starts getting a little bit worried, and then he just grabs the plant, and then he must have told dad what it is, and then dad just basically ripped it all and just got rid of it. But it was basically some kind of a plant that is gets you high. I don't know what kind of high. I just remember laughing a lot. Her and I just would just get higher and higher in our, the mood was uplifting in a crazy level. So yeah, this stuff is in nature, and sometimes you might not even know what are the odds of a person from thousands of years ago to have stumbled upon such things. High, very high.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so now we know that your dad moved that stash to somewhere else.
I never saw that flower again. But hey, however, funny enough, I've had a lot of spiritual encounters, not while I was sniffing the flower, but during that period. So it's very possible that that's where my visions were happening as well, or, who knows?
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's so fascinating.
But
Yeah, I
there
mean,
is a link between nature and that, because to me, that's not to discredit the spirituality actually at all.
correct.
It's the other way around. It creates such a close link with nature that you maybe would not have realized or been able to experience.
Right. Well, even in the Bible, there's a lot of mention of possible psychedelics. I could think of maybe like three right offhand. Like the mandrake root has been known to create some sort of psychedelic hallucinogenic experience, which is used in rituals. And then, canna. Canna is a word that is used, I think, regarding like incense. It was like the highest spiritual incense, which is linked to cannabis, obviously. And
Mm-hmm.
then, wait, there was one more that I thought about. Even manna has been like correlated to maybe mushrooms,
Interesting.
because of their
Yeah.
description, but also wild honey. Wild honey is another one, and some of them were like he ate the honey and then his eyes were opened, or he ate the scroll and his eyes were opened. He felt the nausea in his stomach. It's very very reminiscent of someone who's had some sort of psychedelic experience. But yeah, exactly. It's not something to be said like, oh, these people are doing drugs or whatever. Like we have a very negative outlook on these things. But in current times, we see like how these things have really benefited a lot of neurological and cognitive disorders and stuff like that within adults. Like they do psychedelic treatments and things of that nature. But it is very specific in the scriptures where it talks about like not going too far or eating too much honey, or because I do think that you can become a little bit detached from reality, and not realize that like, okay, but we still are existing in this physical plane, and we need to overcome and achieve something here.
Yes.
So
Yes.
maybe that's guiding me to something that, oh, it feels great and it's so good because it is more of a spiritual experience, which is, we've all had some sort of spiritual, but it doesn't, if you live there, you don't really accomplish or overcome or achieve here. And I think that's what the
Yeah.
difference is taking the tools from that space and reusing them and understanding them here and being like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, my ego is probably not so good for me.
Yeah, yeah. And I think other tools do the exact same thing as these natural, call it psychedelics. I don't want to call it drugs, but like enhancers
Yeah,
of
yeah.
your senses. Because, for example, when I was living in that forest, that oak forest for the 2.5, 3 years, I was in predominantly complete silence to a degree where my speech had become actually pretty bad. Like I wasn't speaking to anyone. And what's interesting to me, this is my own observation. I have no clue if there's any scientific study or link or anything. I think that puts you in a meditative state. When you do carpentry in complete silence and you're doing it not for a job or a stress, but you're doing it for your own joy, it is exceptionally meditative, and you just fly into this zone. And then slowly you just merge with nature in such a way that it's just quite fascinating, whether you're planting a garden, whether you're doing these very important nature related tasks, but you're in silence with nature. It puts you in a meditative state that's absolutely so much, I would say, so much higher than if you sit and attempt to meditate, or even yoga. uh, it's just something completely different, and it gave me very similar experiences that I hear when people who do these what should substances
Hmm. Hmm.
plans. They often report what their experiences are, and not the crazy ones, like ayahuasca. No, never felt that in natural sense, because I also don't recognize and understand why people find that interesting to do. All they talk about is how much they throw up. I'm like, gross. Why would you do that to yourself? But but you know what I'm saying? It just puts you in this state, and it is phenomenal. When they describe it, it sounds like I've already experienced this so much in just being in meditative states and being in silence, without even taking anything or trying anything.
Yeah, I mean, there are moments where the best time for me is morning. I usually typically wake up. In the wintertime, I'm waking up before the sun. In the summertime, it's typically the sun's waking me up because it's coming up so early. But um, uh, yeah, right in that moment, there are times where I've never felt more powerful. I've never felt more significant. I've never felt those things just in like everyday life, but like in that moment of meditation and just like seeing, and a lot of it does have to do with seeing past a lot of the illusion that's being given to us in our time. It's like when you see around it, because seeing the illusion or seeing like the veil, so to speak, is terrifying, and it's very dark. It's very negative feeling, but the fact of being able to see around it or see through it uh, gives you great authority and power, I think. And so I only experienced that in meditation. And there are things that come to me in meditation that I'm like, I just don't know where this stuff comes from. And I'm sure there are some cultural influences in my life. Like I use a lot of Christian terminology even in my meditation because that's that's what I grew up on. So um, but I branched out a lot. So there's a lot of things that I find in meditation now. But whenever I'm presenting these ideas, a lot of times they do come through like the Christianity platform. And the reason why is because I live in America and everyone here is, most everyone is Christian based, especially in the South or in the vast majority of the United States. Um,
Yeah.
but it is nice when you speak to somebody who understands like Buddhist terminology, because I think sometimes the Buddhist terminology fits a bit better to the spiritual side of things. But there is, and some people are afraid of that, like making that connection, like, oh, Christianity's like Buddhism or like this religion, or oh no, now
It's as
you're,
if you're knocking it or something,
yeah, now you're a heretic,
discrediting
and
it.
yeah, right, exactly, like, oh yeah, you're diminishing Christianity by doing something like that. And but I think what we're what we're really living in now is the fact that Christianity is different from every other spiritual religion by saying that you have to basically baptism and then salvation, and recognizing that Jesus died and was resurrected, and saying that and acknowledging that he is your savior. I think that is what separates Christianity from all the other things, because something as simple as like Islam doesn't believe in the death and resurrection, so that would separate them outside of Christianity. They can believe Jesus was a great prophet and all these things and a messenger of God, and there are a lot of people that believe that even in the Islamic faith, some of them believe that Muhammad was maybe compromised and misled in some ways, and in some.
Well, yeah, that's how they also split to Shia and Sunni.
Hmm.
Because if you see, like, some Muslims are very secular, like you don't ever see any trouble coming out of, well, you less so, from people like, I don't want to say Iran is in the country because the country is a dictatorship, but like Persians, very different type of people, Albanians, Bosnians,
But is
like you
the
don't,
Iranian what's their
they're
national
Shia.
religion? Is it?
They're Muslim, but they're Shia Muslims.
All right. For some reason I was still assuming that they might be like Zoroastrian or something.
I think
Um,
they have a fringe minority that still is like that, but I don't know if they're still there really. But for a long while, there was a fringe minority that was still practicing old type of worship, and I think that's where I confused Zoroastrianism with fire worship, because I think actually in Iran there's also fire worshippers, a
hmm.
small minority of fire worshippers that I connected thinking it's maybe Zoroastrianism, but there's separate things. But yeah, so if you look at the Islamic nations, between the Arab world versus some others, like, I don't know, Uzbekistan and
Hmm.
Albania, Bosnia, Iran, like they just really aren't the same type of practice. So I think Islam has a potential of being very highly weaponized, because the words are very easy to just read, and if you choose to put that in somebody's head, then it's easy to do so. And that's why there's a woman called Ayan Ayan Hirsi Ali. So she's a Somalian Muslim who escaped. There's a lot that happened to her. She has a book called Nomad, a book called Infidel, and her whole thing is to reform Islam. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, it's not all bad. Obviously, we see that there's a lot of Muslims who live a very naturally reformed version of Islam. So her thing is it really should be reformed altogether so that this radicalism cannot happen. But either way, let's forget Islam for a second. But if I actually zoom out and look at the religions, Christianity, the New Testament, Jesus' teachings, has a lot more common with other religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, than we want to think. But I think what has become significant, like you said, the whole resurrection, or the for me, it's not the resurrection that's interesting. It's the fact that he got persecuted, because we can see that in today's world, when someone stands up to power, starts questioning power, they get persecuted, they get shut down,
Hmm.
they're not allowed to speak. So I think that's, to me, if I just zoom out from spirituality and look at just the wisdom of that book, that's what it's teaching me. It's
Hmm.
teaching me human nature at its best.
Right.
What
So
to
then,
do, what not to do, but then also how these cycles happen, and how, if you stand up to power, which you should, you will be prosecuted, but it's okay because you're standing up for a higher truth.
right. And so I think that's the really important detail worth talking about is that whole resurrection thing. I mean, I would be safe to say that there are some Christians who would say that Jesus is the only person who was ever resurrected. Or
So
maybe
see, for me, it
Lazarus,
doesn't
right?
matter at all.
Or like Lazarus or no, right, right, right. And it, I think that, um, right. I mean, I'm not really necessarily saying this to convince you of anything
No,
because,
no, no, no. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
because I think you're already like peeking around and seeing like the holes and the flaws in a lot of different things. But I think a lot of Christians are just kind of, like I said before, just a little bit blindly following some things that maybe they're not fully culturally or historically aware of. And so, and they're putting a lot of faith, because this word gets tossed around a lot, faith,
It
you
is
know,
faith. It's all faith. Yeah.
right. And so, but the resurrection, I think, is important because, again, Jesus was not the first deity or God that was resurrected. Maybe the first was probably probably Krishna was probably the first resurrection, which was like
I don't know much
old
about Krishna. Yeah,
Hinduism, you know, and then but then you also have like Osiris was resurrected in the Egyptian pantheon. You had I believe Baal was also resurrected, if I'm not
but
mistaken.
Bobby, they're not really. That's a lie. Jesus's
Correct.
resurrection
Right,
is the
exactly.
truth,
That's the
the one
only
and
truth.
only.
But see, in those specific deities that I named, actually, now thinking about it, I have very strong connections to solar worship and solar deities because Krishna and Hinduism, big time solar deity. This is
Which
big
makes so
for them.
much sense. If you really wanna like, here's how I see this. People are so self-involved that they have to be able to see something and touch it or to visualize it in their own image to follow. But isn't it even better, like sun, I think George Carlin, rest in peace, has a very interesting bit about that. He's like, if I was to believe in something, I guess sun makes the most sense. I can see it, it gives life, right? It's a source of energy that you cannot even comprehend. Well, we can, but you know what I mean. I think it is the human nature to, it's just elements of those who want to control, those who cannot. We brought up a very interesting analogy one time in our personal chats, which did not make any videos, but this is a good moment to bring that up. When, let's say, someone is cooking, you can give them the ingredients, and a cook knows what to do with those ingredients. They don't need to know how much of what. They don't need the precise recipe to follow. But then there are those who you give them the ingredients, including some recipe, but you maybe missed the how many grams of salt, and they'll be like, I can't cook this. How many grams of salt? And you're like, I don't know how to do this for you, but like, and you said, well, maybe Jesus gave the ingredients and you're supposed to be doing the cooking. And it is, I think, a great analogy because there are people who like to control, and then there are people who cannot cook. They have the ingredients, and then obviously that's going to be exploited. So now it's going to be, laws, rules, regulations, order is going to be given to you. And there's good and bad to that too, because there are people who literally cannot navigate the world on their own. Is it technically, it becomes somewhat of a positive that there is a system that can guide them, even if it feels so rigid and so ridiculous, and that has its own negativity when you just follow this rigid way and then you don't want to think outside the box. But net more positive than negative, because oftentimes we see these people who come to Jesus, right, and they maybe were drug addicts having a terrible life, completely off the rails, and then they find peace and salvation in the Word of God through church, which I criticize, but at the same time it does serve masses in a positive way for the most part. But then, boy, is it so easy to exploit and just manage the narrative however you want, which it has been exploited over and over. And that's the problem I have with it. It's just there's no good answer as to. It's not like there's a solution. You can't. I would not say abolish religion, right? Like,
Hmm.
abolish the church system, because things might collapse.
Yeah.
But how do you create more cooks?
Right. I see what you're saying. Well, that and that's this is like one of the best analogies I think we've come across naturally. The organization is the downfall of it all because it is exploited when I can take someone in a very low, dark place, give them some sort of hope in some thing, and it lingers, it lasts. I mean, people really have life-changing, transformative experiences. But I feel like what we're missing in all of that is um like what does it really mean? Like what
The
does that
actual
really mean?
spirituality is what we're missing.
Yeah, because this person now is now kind of in what's the word, initiated or whatever into this
Called. okay.
religion they're initiated in, and it's like now I have to do all these things rather than saying like, okay, I've had this transformative experience, and just continue with that feeling, continue with that passion. That passion gets lost and it becomes transformed into something that I believe is more oppressive of a feeling, where it's like I'm walking around and everybody I see who I know is a Christian, it's like, hey, I know they're doing good in life. I know that they're okay. Their soul is happy. And, I see these other people, oh, they're not Christians. So it's like there becomes this mental hierarchy that happens. It's like you look down on someone who's Islamic, you look down on someone who doesn't believe in Jesus in a way, and we don't even really recognize it that way. We just see it as like, no, but their soul needs this,
But
and
I think that's what it is, that because now you have given that rigid framework, then that's how it's going to continue. But I can actually even argue the other side, which is not my side. I can argue something I don't believe in, but I can see why this exists. Like, for example, if you think about a person who just got saved, right? They just found Jesus. Now they're told that they have to get up, do this, do that, and before even that order was not possible. Jordan Peterson, in his book, I haven't read it, but I know I've seen speeches and stuff. So his 12 rules of life, I think he says something about like get up and make your bed, right? So it's like Christianity does that for these people that normally would be perhaps so unorganized and so incapable of going about their day, that now they have this framework to follow. But yes, when you follow this framework and you finally can make your bed, you now have a job, you're doing well, everything is good, but then that same rigid mind continues, and then all of a sudden, God forbid, this is where it fails. This is where you start thinking you're better than someone else because you achieved this. And so nobody understands. You're just the only one who understands this. And then they just start the negativity starts, the
yeah,
hypocrisy, the negativity, and it starts backfiring. So it doesn't, basically, it helps you to create order in your life, but it doesn't give you wisdom. And Christianity was all about, the pure Christianity was all about to give you the power and the wisdom to be your own person. That's how
right.
I see it, at least.
Yeah, I mean the way Jesus speaks is very radical. It's very against the structure of it
Authority.
all. Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
authority, and I mean and at the same time also being obedient to authority, but it's a higher spiritual authority rather than an earthly,
Yes.
authority here.
Also, basically, yes. And the way I see that is like when he preaches that you should love your enemy, don't kill, cheat, steal, and all this stuff, all these principles that are good, right? Turn the other cheek. There's such great wisdom in that. Like, I remember growing up thinking, like, what? Why would you say that? Eye for an eye makes so much sense to me, right? You come do something to my family, I will, like, you kill a family member of mine, I want to kill you. Like, that should be that sounds just, right? And it does, but technically you're giving in to anger, a perpetual cycle of violence that you may never get out of. Like, okay, I kill your family, you killed my family member, I killed your family member, now another family member comes kill my family. Like, we can get into a cycle, and it takes a certain level of high road to detach and be able to just trust that things happen for a reason, and hopefully this person will, karma will get him, and you just kind of almost forgive. Or maybe even deeper than that, which is which is a hard one, but it's understandable, is when you recognize that this human wasn't born like this. This human was born an innocent, pure soul that, through whatever failures of parenting, failures of life, has turned into this. That doesn't mean we shouldn't punish, of course, criminals by any means, but when you're forgiving an act, when someone is being nasty towards you, it's just because you're just like, you can see their own misery and you just feel bad for them that they're that miserable, because it must be pretty hard to live this kind of a miserable life. And that's to me, that's what means turn the other cheek, basically.
But you can easily see like how that would give rise to evil, because let's say that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna prey on the fact that you're gonna continue to forgive me and turn the
100%.
other cheek and all these different things. And so that's
But I
where,
feel like there's a balance that Jesus teaches. Like he says turn the other cheek, but he also clearly stands up for himself, right?
right. And that's, I think that's the difference, is that he's not permitting any physical violence of any sort. Um,
It's
yeah, I
very
can't help but,
stoic, like it's very stoic. It's
well, I
such.
can't help but think about all the different, there were many forms of Christianity before the Bible was concluded. There were a lot of different people in the first century who believed differently about Jesus and the way he lived his
Well,
life
it's
and what his,
understandable because stories are being told and different telephone game, like the different line is getting to different people. It's very understandable.
right. I mean, there are some who believe that Jesus was speaking directly against the God of Israel. There
That's
were
how
some
I see it.
there is a large group of people that were heavily persecuted and suppressed, first, second centuries, third century, um, and who were completely erased at some point, probably around fifth century, completely erased, but
Yeah.
then rediscovered in 1945. So, who preserved those writings? Like why are those preserved specifically? But it does give a very different picture of who Jesus was. And these are some of these writings are much older than the current copies of the Gospels and the New Testament that we have today, because a lot of that was finalized much later. Um,
Yeah. I mean, the
and
way
so,
I see those kind of things. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no. Well, yeah, I guess I just want to finish with like. So he's speaking directly against the God of Israel and basically saying that this is an almost a flawed God who thought he was the only most powerful, but failed to realize that there's something even greater than he. And I mean
Yeah.
that comes out, especially when you start looking at. That's why the history is important. That's why it's so important to go back in history and really see uh, when the writings were written and how they were written and how they've been
Altered.
altered. Yeah, that's a good word. Altered throughout time and throughout the years.
I mean, that's the thing. So this is why it makes no sense to just wholeheartedly to take anything at face value, right? Because, for example, if I am someone who wants to create a narrative of certain sort, like I really want to control a certain where the story goes, I can do this even now as a person for shits and giggles, and I will never know, of course, the result because I'll be long dead and gone. But imagine you write something, you write a whole new history or pretend to have been so and so, right? Like maybe I pretend to be random Donald Trump, and I write something as if I am Donald Trump, like my personal thoughts of, I don't know, Donald Trump, right? And I just write this thing.
It's, I was trying to do the noise cancellation because I think I need to have the noise cancellation off, because then that way it allows me to hear external sounds, and if they're getting loud or crazy, I can always just kind of like click my microphone on mute. So I was trying to switch that and
Oh,
accidentally
okay.
hung up the call by accident.
Oh, okay. What was I saying? I was saying
You were Donald
something
Trump.
about. Okay. Yes. Okay. Let's pretend I have some kind of a idea, or let's pretend I'm Donald Trump. Actually, I am Donald Trump, and I want from 100 to 200 years from now some kind of a record of me to be found somewhere, and I can make myself whatever I want to be, right? Like I can write whatever that narrative I want to take, and I can have other friends of mine who existed in that time to do the same, and then we just dump it in a sea, or I don't know, bury it on the ground in Mar-a-Lago or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden 200 years from now, 300, 500, 600, whenever that building gets demolished and some excavation happens, all of a sudden these historic old records are found, but in reality it was planted by with purpose. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So when I see the Dead Sea Scrolls and this and that, like people have done this for I mean KGB has done this when they patiently would just dump something and then patiently wait for decades, even if it preceded their timeline, to then find it and then start to recreate, like to create a new type of history and course of history. So to me, it's just so easy.
No,
I
I
don't
like
believe
this
anything.
perspective because it's something that I have specifically thought about myself in meditation. Just like, well, how can you trust something that was uncovered? Because I thought the exact same thing. Like, I could easily create something, bury it, and just wait. But what's interesting about something like the Dead Sea Scrolls is, well, I'll just take like the Book of Isaiah. I mean, even all the other books that are in there, it's very similar to what I'm about to say. But like the Book of Isaiah, it actually is more accurate. The Dead Sea Scrolls, Isaiah, is more accurate to older versions rather than like a new updated version. And so that's what leads me into thinking that, oh, okay, what I like about the discovery is that we can see what we've moved away from so much more clearly rather than saying like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, this was adjusted over time or this was adjusted over time. Now we're looking at a much older copy again, and we're able to compare it to today's copy, and I think that's very significant. But what's the most significant about that whole thing is that one is being suppressed and one is being given the front seat.
Promoted.
And so if you look at what's being suppressed, I think you can see why. You can see why certain things are suppressed. Like the worship
So
of Ashira, you
Shira,
know? Ashira. Ashira?
Ashira.
Ashira.
Is that in the Bible? I don't know that.
The only reference now in the Bible is that basically they were not allowed to worship Ashira anymore, the Israelites
Ah, okay.
specifically. Okay, so they were worshiping Asherah, which is technically was uh, Yahweh, could be Yahweh's counterpart, his feminine half, so to speak, um, but is also connected to another deity within the Canaanite pantheon, Asherah
Mm-hmm.
specifically. And actually in the original Israelite writings, Yahweh was the son of El.
Okay.
Okay, and then his wife was Ashira, basically, and then slowly became Yahweh became El, took on the qualities of El, and the qualities of Ashira kind of got forgotten and lost. But what the reference you find in the Bible is how they had erected some sort of
So that's
thing altar
actually
to her, and it was directly beside the altar of Yahweh. So it was in the same temple. They used to have altars for Asherah in the same temple as altars for Yahweh.
it's funny because normally I see things literally, but that one gave me a little bit of a, I guess, allegorical. What's the word? Perspective. Kind of like what you just described made me think of like how the son becomes the father. Like a child grows up to become kind of the father. But that also made me think something completely random. What I haven't done research on this to kind of dive into it, but it's been on my mind a little bit lately. When you think about Catholicism, like Christianity has all these branches, right? All these branches, and they're specifically, they have a name and they're different, and some of them that just do not accept the other, and so on, which is a whole different topic because divide and conquer applies here as well. Like you know, the age old divide and conquer, we say all the time as if we understand, but yet Christianity is fragmented into a million pieces. But Catholicism seems to, again, observational, I have no clue if this is true, seems to come across as one. Like there's no like one Catholicism, this other branch of Catholicism. However, if I look at Catholicism, the way South Americans, Latin people practice, it's heavily Mary based. right? It's so clearly like they pray to Mary, their symbolism is all Mary, and then they are a lot more of the type that you can just literally, you know, go kill someone and then say, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. So that kind of Catholicism is portrayed. I see it with South American or more Latin people. But then you come to the West, to American Catholicism, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with that. Or is it, am I just ignorant, or do they also worship Mary? I don't think so, because when I hear someone, a lot of the Catholics who talk, like Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh and even Candace Owens lately, I think Russell Brand, maybe I don't listen to him too much, but when they talk about Catholicism, I feel like I'm getting more Orthodox type of vibes than Catholicism. So is that what is Catholicism in America
Well,
technically in that
there
case?
are some differences in Catholicism. I
Okay.
haven't researched it enough myself, but what I do
Okay.
see is that there's a level of what I see in like politicians, because you're specifically mentioning politicians. What I see there is a lot of like,
They're not politicians. They're political commentators or just cultural commentators.
right. A lot of this seems to be more, okay, if they're calling themselves Catholic, it could be more similar to something like Rosicrucianism or like Knights Templar type of understanding, which isn't all this Mary base type stuff. It's more of a hidden knowledge. I mean, this is going to be a theme, I think, in this podcast. We're going to really touch on that. Like hidden knowledge has been talked about, discussed throughout history. I mean, you have old mysticism and all these different things all the way up into now. I guess you could consider Masonics as hidden hidden knowledge. Um, and now I guess Gnosticism would be considered like neo-Gnosticism, because Gnosticism was first century, so now it's maybe Sethian or neo-Gnostic. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that these groups, they might associate with a specific religion, like say Catholicism, but they're not following the same routines. I mean, they probably still do mass and probably still do
They do. They definitely
confession.
do mass liturgy. I actually worked for a Catholic company, and it's
Hmm.
really funny. Only later, recently, I'm thinking back and I'm like, I don't actually recall anything about Mary. Where if you think about Catholicism from the Latin view,
Hmm.
it's all about Mary. So it's very interesting. I guess I don't know the answer to it, but it's just something I've observed that in US everything is just done differently.
Everything is. It truly is. Yeah, you wonder sometimes because it's so diverse, it's so spread out that I feel like it gives people this sense of like I hold the truth and no one else
Hmm.
does. Whereas I think if it was like a much bigger organization, it was like more unified. I think that, well, in order for it to be unified, it would have to slowly strip away the nonsense for it to
Yeah.
be more unified. I feel like the more nonsense that added, the more divided it becomes. And that's just how it goes. It's like the more we can
Yeah.
split apart this atom, the more we can
And there are
create
more than
chaos.
enough forces wanting to split apart so that they can slowly kill the ideology altogether. And we're just giving into it really well.
And this is all an external force, right? So if we say,
External
hey, you know what?
human force.
Let's eliminate that external side. Let's eliminate the external beliefs. Let's eliminate the dogma and actually just go internal into an internal place. Then it all becomes very unified because we're all going within. And I think that's
Yeah.
where it's becomes we start getting closer to the actual message of what's being said, rather
Yeah,
than
and I think
something
sometimes
that's been there for
Christians
history.
misunderstand the going within with selfishness, and they just don't seem to accept the that link with meditation, going internal to get the answers, and to actually have that direct line of communication with that energy. Like oftentimes when I talk about going within, I can see that it's like some remarks are made that it just makes it sound or feel like you're just suggesting selfishness, when you're just absolutely suggesting none of you're suggesting just detachment, so that you can actually just quiet down and listen. But I think this is actually a good place to end this one episode, because we're at an hour mark, so that it doesn't get really hard to chop it up.